Hello and welcome to Stand With Us Connect. Thank you for joining us. It's great to connect with you. I'm Michael Dixon, Executive Director of Stand With Us Israel, and I'm coming to you live from Israel today. In a moment, I'll bring in my colleagues from the United States on the topic of today's show, which is COVID-19 and anti-Semitism, the legal front. As you know, Stand With Us has been at the forefront of getting Israel education to people all over the world in multiple languages in these challenging times. We've broadcast over 25 live shows reaching 500,000 people, pretty incredible. So if you love the work of Stand With Us and you want to support it, you can do so with any amount at standwithus.com/donate. I hope you're well and safe at this time of uncertainty and unrest. We send our heartfelt condolences to the family of George Floyd, and we hope for better days ahead. We know that these are extremely difficult times with so many questions about how to respond to the hatred we are seeing displayed towards various groups. We condemn acts of violence and hatred in all their manifestations, and we stand with those peacefully seeking the betterment of society. We hope you all remain safe, and we're grateful you could join us through this broadcast to learn a bit more about some of the ways we're utilizing the law to fight against the world's oldest hatred, anti-Semitism, and helping to protect the rights of Jews and those who support Israel. As COVID-19 spreads and suspends normal life, anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity have risen alongside it and in unique manifestations. Today's show is a live discussion on anti-Semitism during the coronavirus pandemic with the Stand With Us Sadov Legal Department and the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. We're thrilled to offer 1 hour of continuing legal education credit to licensed attorneys who are attending today's session. Please email your state bar number and state of jurisdiction to legal@standwithus.com, and we'll send you a certificate after verifying your attendance. So with over 40 years of collective experience in the field, my guests today are here to answer all your questions live about anti-Semitism, First Amendment issues, Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and holding campus administrators accountable when anti-Semitic discrimination arises. Now, as an educational organization, which is non-partisan and apolitical, you'll see our experts raising perspectives from many sides and presenting many views in order to give the most professional and all-encompassing overview of the situation on the ground. So let's get to it. I'm very excited to host 3 top professionals in the field. First, we have Yael Lamon. She's director of the Stand With Us Sadov Legal Department. As director, Yael coordinates a team of 3 staff attorneys and over 170 pro bono attorneys. She's a graduate of Columbia University, graduating Pi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude, and as a Truman finalist. She graduated from the New York University Law School, and before joining Stand With Us, Yael worked as a litigator at a New York law firm, and then at the ADL, specializing in hate crimes. Yael, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very much. And next up, we have Jonathan Bell, who's the Associate Director of the Stand With Us Sadov Legal Department. Jonathan regularly advises on First Amendment free speech rights and responsibilities and reviews federal, state, and local regulations, as well as campus policies to enforce rights when they're infringed upon. Jonathan graduated magna cum laude from Loyola University in Chicago School of Law, and he earned his undergraduate degree in history and political science from the University of Wisconsin. Jonathan, we're excited to hear from you today. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have with us Carly Gamble. She's the director of the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. Carly is a seasoned constitutional litigator with extensive experience handling matters involving free speech and religious liberties, fighting anti-Semitism, including the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic BDS campaign on campuses, in court, and at the United Nations. Carly, we are looking forward to your professional insights on this tough topic. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. I'm looking forward to some great discussion and questions.
That's right. And I'll remind our audience that you can send us your questions in the comments and we'll put it to our 3 legal experts. So I hope the 3 of you are all ready, because our audience and our viewers certainly are. Yael, perhaps you can begin by telling us about the work of the Stand With Us Legal Department before the pandemic.
Thank you, Michael. Well, before this pandemic and crisis hit us, the Stand With Us Side Off Legal Department has been providing free legal resources to students and community activists for over 6 years. Since our founding, we've received over 1,000 requests for legal help, 200 this year alone. 60% of our work is on campus. And what we do as a legal department is we analyze anti-Semitic and anti-Israel incidents. We work with whoever is the claimant to determine the appropriate response, and then we bring all Stand With Us resources to bear. What this means is that we work daily with Stand With Us campus coordinators, regional staff, students, community members, partner organizations to remain constantly informed of potentially actionable matters. And as a result, we're uniquely positioned to be the first responders when anti-Israel or anti-Semitic activity occurs. And before this pandemic and since, our work includes providing free, prompt, on-the-ground legal resources to anyone facing anti-Israel and anti-Israel extremism. We've been doing this for years, and we are as busy as ever, unfortunately, during this pandemic as anti-Semitism is on the rise.
It's great that you're there. And obviously before this pandemic began, Stand With Us established the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. Carly, you had that up. Can you tell us a bit about the work that it does?
Absolutely. As anyone who's familiar with Stand With Us knows, for the last 19 years, it's obviously been always a part of the mission of Stand With Us to combat anti-Semitism. But we realized about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, that there was really a need for a concerted effort, a department that focuses like a laser on anti-Semitism. And so the work that we do is really focused on 4 areas, which includes helping others to identify anti-Semitism when it occurs. You would think that that might be readily understood, but unfortunately it's not. So that's a large part of what we do. And one of the ways that we're doing that is helping to support the adoption of a consistent definition of anti-Semitism, which is the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. Including its examples, which I think are extremely helpful. We also expose anti-Semitic activity when it occurs. And then we, alongside the Side Off Legal Department and others outside, the pro bono attorneys that we work with, things like that, are working to take action, including legal action, when that's appropriate. So those are kind of the 4 key areas. We work with a number of organizations when we can to work on consistent messaging. Again, just making sure that as anti-Semitism is continuing to rise, that we are there, the same as the legal department, to make sure that we are there to address those issues. And so really the way it works is similar to the legal department. We work internally with all of our various departments on strategy, and then externally as well. So again, it's unfortunate that it was necessary to create the department, but we are here, and we will continue to stand alongside others as we combat this societal disease.
And we're glad you're there. Jonathan, Yael mentioned that the work continues of the legal department during the pandemic, but how has coronavirus impacted your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, students may not currently be on campus right now, but that doesn't mean that the anti-Israel issues that we see magically disappear. And to be honest, Michael, you could put things in 2 buckets, one being an extension of what we already saw on a daily basis before the pandemic, and the other being a different method of conducting anti-Israel activity. And I should mention that these are intertwined. So let's unpack that a little bit. So what were we already seeing out there? Social media issues. They've been there for years. We had a recent issue at Santa Monica College where a handful of students who were part of a pro-Israel group, Students Supporting Israel, attended the AIPAC policy conference a few months back. It became public a few days after AIPAC, or within the weeks after AIPAC, that 2 of these over 3 of the over 18,000 attendees at the conference tested positive for the coronavirus. And somebody that we believe is affiliated with Santa Monica College started posting inflammatory and derogatory posts on social media, Facebook, Twitter, blaming the students from Santa Monica College who are at AIPAC for the spread of COVID-19 at Santa Monica College. Now, this really marginalized the students at Santa Monica College, and the administration, to be blunt, turned a blind eye and basically said First Amendment rights protect the post. And we felt it was important to let the administrators know that they still had an obligation to protect their students against this discriminatory conduct. So we sent them a letter outlining their obligations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits the discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. We also discussed the December executive order on combating anti-Semitism, which clarifies that Jewish students facing anti-Semitic discrimination based on race, color, or national origin may in fact receive Title VI protection. And I'm very happy to report that Santa Monica College administrators recently announced a no hate campaign that included anti-Semitic incidents as one of the reasons for their campaign, which shows us that they're taking this issue seriously, and we hope that they continue to do this and proactively protect their students. So what are we seeing now in the second bucket? Well, anti-Israel activists taking their actions online. The example I mentioned is somewhat of a hybrid. Social media platforms have been around for a while, and this has been one method for the anti-Israel crowd to spread their hateful, sometimes harassing and defamatory messaging. But we've certainly seen an uptick as from some of the same student groups as they take their anti-Semitism online. But this also spills into online classrooms and meetings, particularly through a practice called Zoom bombing, where anti-Israel activists show up uninvited in Zoom meetings, in classes, to spread their hatred online. And we've heard of different examples. There was a talk by the president at Yeshiva University in New York. There was a student group at a college in Massachusetts. Sometimes the activists stay silent. They remove their clothing that shows a swastika or shows a tattoo. It's anti-Semitic. Sometimes it's actually verbal. Sometimes it's in the chat feature. And this is arguably the equivalent of a disruption, which we've been dealing with for years, and which for years has been weaponized by anti-Israel groups shutting down pro-Israel activities and events, which generally violates both state laws and campus policies. And since it's now online, it might actually violate federal cyber laws such as cyber stalking or harassment. So that's what we've really been seeing post-pandemic.
Excellent. And just to follow on from that, I mean, you spoke about the students who were at the APAC conference and the idea of Jews spreading a disease. Now, of course, Jews have had a long and tortured history of being targeted and scapegoated during pandemics. So I'd like to talk briefly about the history of Jews during past pandemics like this one. Yael, perhaps you can give us a brief background as to how this looked historically.
Sure, thank you. Probably the most prominent plague example to come to mind for all of us is the bubonic plague of the 1300s, 700 years ago, which killed 40% of Europe's population. And even though many Jews died from the plague, many Jews were accused of causing the plague. Why were they accused of causing the Black Death? There's two main reasons. One is in the Middle Ages, there was no medicine, no understanding of how disease spreads. So desperate for answers, people turned to the church. In medieval Europe, remember that life was structured around Christianity. It was both the common religion and the foundation for governance. The church told people that the plague was God's retribution for wickedness, and some clergy said that Jews were spreading the disease to take down Christianity. According to one conspiracy theory at the time, rabbis from faraway lands allegedly were sending local Jews letters instructing them to poison wells. The mixture in some places was supposed to be a concoction of frogs, lizards, spiders, and Christian hearts. It was wrapped in a large cloth the size of a nut and spilled into a well. These rumors abounded. A second reason was Jews were targeted for economic reasons. Moneylending was one of the only occupations permitted to Jews and forbidden to Christians. And some rulers who owed monies to Jews opened their city gates to the mobs, hoping that their debts would go up in smoke. And so either out of religious or economic reasons, the anti-Semitism that unleashed during the bubonic plague created an entire paradigm shift in Europe. Unlike before the plague, Jews were no longer seen as different or as tolerated outcasts, but as actively and immediately dangerous. How did this manifest? Nearly all the killings of Jews took the form of burnings. A contemporary writer in Germany wrote, within 1 year, all the Jews between Cologne and Austria were burned. Now, this is before the Spanish Inquisition, hundreds of years before the Holocaust. I'm going to give some examples and just think if any sound familiar for the way that anti-Semitism manifested in the centuries that followed. In Constance, Germany, Jews were herded into pits, fields, or houses to be burned alive with no possibility of escape. Anyone who actually survived and tried to escape would then be attacked with rocks by waiting mobs. In Strasbourg, Jews were stripped of nearly all their clothing, led into a house built just for this purpose, and burned alive. Sometimes Jews were allowed to convert. Often Jewish babies were torn from their parents and baptized as their parents burned. Some Jews tried to resist. In Mainz, Germany, Jews fought back 200 attackers, but when the mob counterattack began, reminiscent of Masada, or a precursor to the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews barricaded themselves in their homes and set fire to themselves rather than surrender. More than 6,000 Jews died there. Some tried to intervene to help the Jews. Pope Clement VI said that it was illogical that Jews would spread disease since they were also dying from the plague. And elsewhere, some principalities tried to halt the violence against the Jews for fear that mob violence could be turned against violence against the government. Some monarchs cut a deal. In Nuremberg, the monarch agreed to massacre all the Jews in exchange for a cut of the wealth derived from looting Jewish possessions. These are just a few examples. The bubonic plague's new type of anti-Semitism became the foundation for how to persecute Jews from that point on. And I think that is one of the most interesting things to look at now as we see new types of anti-Semitism emerging during this plague.
It's such a tortured history, isn't it? And it reminds us that anti-Semitism isn't just words, it's deadly. And so let's take us up to modern times now. Carly, I wonder if you found there's been an increase in anti-Semitism during this coronavirus outbreak? And if so, what was unique about it?
Yeah, unfortunately, as I said earlier, anti-Semitism we know is a societal disease. And so anytime that the culture is experiencing something difficult, hard to explain, hard to correct, we generally do see a rise in anti-Semitism. And the way that that looks is, kind of described by Yael, is scapegoating. Generally, because of the pandemic and because of social distancing and stay-at-home orders, generally what we've seen is that anti-Semitism has spread rapidly online. What makes that unique, I think, is that it's particularly dangerous because of the mass audience that can be reached that way. One of the things that we've seen, just for example, on campus activity, and as Yael said, the legal department, 60% of what we do is work on campus, and a lot of the center's work is also with students on campus. What we normally see are event disruptions and, in-person anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activity. And while that's dangerous enough, just in terms of the audience that can be reached and the targeting and marginalizing that can happen as a result of that, what we're seeing now is a much broader, vast audience being reached with some of the same rhetoric, some of the same anti-Israel and anti-Semitic speech that we normally see, just again, able to reach a much larger audience. We saw an example back maybe a little over a month ago of an Orthodox Jewish man who went to a Toyota service center. He had a scheduled appointment. Others were being served. He showed up and was told that they were closed when clearly they weren't. It was obvious that the station was up and running. And when he pressed a little further and asked why he wasn't able to get service, he was told it was because he was responsible for spreading the virus. And that was clearly based on nothing more than his appearance, and the obvious reality that he was Jewish. And so these are some of the things. And, Jonathan mentioned the Zoom bombing. That's another way that we're seeing disruption of pro-Israel and Jewish meetings that are going on, interrupting that with anti-Semitic rhetoric and messages and images. So again, there's nothing new under the sun. We know that anti-Semitism is going to rear its head in new ways, but it's not really new. It's just, again, we're living our lives so much online right now that this is the way that anti-Semites have found to continue their work. I'll give one more example, just that we've seen, again, online messaging. A lot of the far-right white supremacist groups have gotten together in chat rooms, and they're encouraging, at least they were, I don't know if this is still as big of a deal, again, because the pandemic seems to be a little more under control than it was, but at the height of it, there was a lot of encouragement within those groups to spread. We have a responsibility because of our mission and our positions to spread the disease. If any of us finds out that we are positive for COVID-19, spread it to police and to Jews. Again, so it's, as you mentioned, it's not just words. There is actual dangerous action that we're seeing happen, kind of across the board, both online and to the extent that in-person interaction is taking place. We're still seeing that as well.
Very worrying. Jonathan, Carly mentioned campus. So based on the historical review that we just spoke about, should we anticipate a rise in anti-Semitism on campus when schools reopen? And if so, in what ways?
Unfortunately, I do think we should anticipate that rise. And to be quite honest, I am not 100% sure we needed the pandemic to recognize this surge. Yael already talked about our numbers from earlier this year, and just picking right back up from where Carly left off, there has been this increase in anti-Semitism as a result of coronavirus globally. And as Israel becomes more and more divisive and polarizing between students on campuses, I think this absolutely is going to play out once schools reopen. We've already heard from students at Columbia University. Their student council have been strategizing a campus-wide BDS referendum for months before campus closed. Well, they recently announced that they were going to postpone the referendum to the fall once they expect campus to reopen. Now, why do I mention this? We usually see BDS resolutions and student senates and campus-wide BDS referendums annually, but we usually see them in the spring. This usually coincides with student elections. Now, because of the pandemic, many of the scheduled resolutions or referendums were put on hold. So we anticipate the anti-Israel side to come out strong once students are back on campus this fall, if they go back this fall. Now, what else could we be on the lookout for? Student or student group discrimination issues, students being treated differently or student groups being treated differently due to philosophical differences on Israel. Now, this might possibly violate various school policies as well as state and federal laws. Disruptions, like Carly talked about, like I mentioned with Zoom bombings of pro-Israel events. Also, student government election interferences, perhaps more specifically, election challenges, since the spring elections in 2020 did not have the traditional surge in anti-Israel or anti-Semitic activity with campuses closed. Now, I should also mention here that the Stand With Us side-off legal department and the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, Yael, Carly, myself, we're actively working together to strategize how we can best educate campus administrators about this possible surge and what they can do both proactively in order to protect their students, but also protect their universities from potential legal ramifications.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to add one thing, if it's okay. Sorry, Michael. Which is that in addition to what Carly and Jonathan said, I think we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that the anti-Semitism that we see online is, God forbid, but is starting to starting to take the form of vandalizing synagogues. We're seeing that, unfortunately, starting to happen, either in the form of political speech against Israel, or against Jews. And I fear that we may just be starting to see the start of this. Hopefully it'll get nipped in the bud. But it's what Carly was saying is it's very real that sometimes the posturing that hateful people do online then has actual repercussions in real life crimes.
Absolutely. Before I challenge you with my next question, I want to just give a shout out to some of the people who are watching us. So I'll share with you all who is with us. Shalom from India, says Victoria. We have Lexi calling in from Spearfish, South Dakota. Niam, I think I pronounced your name right, is saying shalom from Ireland. Gordana is saying greetings from London. Sylvia is watching from Germany, Hamburg. Nicole is with us from South Africa. And Craig from Canada. Martin from Northern Ireland. Many more. I can't get to all of them. So let's go to our next question. And this is really to the crux of the issue for all of you. We've gathered these legal minds together. How do we fight anti-Semitism? What can we do about anti-Semitism from the legal perspective? Perhaps I can go to you first, Carly.
Sure. Yeah, the good news is there are ways that we can fight anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity legally. I think two of the biggest tools that we have, and I'll give just kind of a little bit of an overview. I know most people are well aware that the First Amendment, the free speech clause, comes into play here, and then also Title VI. And so I'll just talk a little bit about each of those. The general rule for free speech under the free speech clause is that private speech is protected. It's a really simple general rule. The issue with that, of course, is that there are a number of exceptions. That's the nuance that comes in. And so there are times when speech is not protected. Generally, hate speech, speech with which you disagree, speech that's controversial, that's offensive, not only is it protected by the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has made it clear that because it's controversial, because it's offensive, that's all the more reason to protect it. And that's actually a good thing. I think that's one of the beauties of our Constitution here in the US is that we have the freedom to express ourselves. And so, that's a helpful thing. And I know that can be really frustrating when anti-Semitic speech and rhetoric is so rampant and you want to do something about it. But the good news is that the way that the First Amendment does work is that, and Yael's going to get into this, I know, in just a minute, talking about, when hate speech itself isn't protected and when we can do something more about it. But one of the ways that the First Amendment does work for us is, we've mentioned several times these disruptions of various events that go on. And Jonathan mentioned earlier that those disruptions generally violate both campus policies and local and or state laws. They also can violate the First Amendment because in the same way that we have the right as private citizens to speak, we have the right to be heard, and the listeners have the right to hear what it is we're saying. And so when student groups and other whether it's citizens in the community are trying to speak and express themselves, if there is a substantial disruption of that, then that can be a violation of First Amendment rights. We've seen that happen. We were involved a few years ago in a community situation, where First Amendment rights were violated when there were individuals who were out just peacefully protesting a mural that was honoring Resmaa O'Day, and they said this is problematic.
Resmaa O'Day, a terrorist.
Exactly, yes, who's responsible for the death of 2 Jewish students. And so, their position was we should be honoring the memory of the victims, not of the terrorist murderer. And there were a number of incidents that occurred around that, but there was an attempt to silence them. And so again, there was the opportunity for us to step in with the help of pro bono legal outside attorneys, and were able to defend and protect their First Amendment rights. So, the First Amendment, one, yes, it does protect a lot of the speech that we have issues with and wish weren't happening. But on the other hand, it also is a tool that we can use. As Jonathan mentioned earlier, and I think you mentioned in the introduction, one of the other tools that we have at our disposal that is sorely needed and is getting a lot of use right now is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that's a non-discrimination law. And without getting into all the nuance there, yes, there's tension sometimes between the First Amendment, the Free Speech Clause, and these non-discrimination laws. But thankfully for us, it's pretty clear when we're dealing with these situations, and largely on campus, that these universities have a responsibility under Title VI to make sure that discrimination in the form of a hostile campus climate, and for our purposes for Jewish students, doesn't occur. And if it does, then they have an obligation to rectify that, to correct that, and to make sure that that situation is improved, and that there is the ability for Jewish students to fully participate in all aspects and programs of the university. And so, we have, I don't know if this was mentioned earlier, but obviously we have a Title VI complaint that we issued against the University of California, Los Angeles, based on some of this anti-Semitic rhetoric and treatment of a student in the classroom. And so it's an extremely important tool. It's not something, I want to be really clear, it's not something that you just pull out anytime that anti-Semitism is expressed, but it certainly does have to be something that rises to the level of a pervasively hostile environment. And that can be a single incident at times. There's something that's egregious enough that rises to that level, or it can be a pattern. And so, we are constantly assessing, and we're in contact with students, through our campus department, and working with them to make sure that if and when that type of a situation occurs on a campus, that we're ready to utilize that. And as Jonathan mentioned earlier, I'll just finish with this, we now have the kind of the bolstering through the executive order from December that just makes it really clear. It doesn't change anything. What it does is it makes it really crystal clear that Jewish students are protected by Title VI in the circumstances in which there is discrimination that occurs and creates a pervasively hostile environment. And I guess let me correct myself. It actually does change one thing, and it's an important thing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's right in line with what we at the center are doing, which is supporting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And so the one thing that the executive order did change is it mandates now that every federal agency that is responsible in the executive department for enforcing Title VI is now mandated to use that definition. And so again, it's really important that we have that consistency, and we're able to use that now, in the work that we're doing as well.
Very important. Yeah, Al, can I turn to you? Let's talk about fighting anti-Semitism from a legal perspective. Obviously, hate speech doesn't stay as speech. We discussed that, but sometimes it turns into a crime.
Right, as Carly said, and as you mentioned, the First Amendment protects speech, no matter how offensive it is, even if it's hateful. So for instance, at a university, we saw earlier this year, carved out in snow, someone said a hateful message, F Israel, in huge letters. That's political speech, that's hateful speech. that it's protected speech. When it crosses the line and becomes a crime, that's when it becomes a hate crime. So what would be an example? An example would be something we saw, let's say, at a high school parking lot in Boca Raton. Someone spray painted a swastika. So that would be a hate crime. Why? You have the underlying crime, which was vandalism of private property, and then you have the hateful message, which is a swastika. Combined together, that then is a hate crime. And one thing that's important to note is, why do we punish hate crimes? Isn't it just a form of speech? The reason why is because it impacts more than just the individual whose property was impacted or who was the victim of the crime. If I'm walking by and I see that swastika on the parking lot, I feel scared. I feel worried that maybe they're gonna come for me next. It impacts the whole community of the person who has been targeted as a result of that hate crime. And as a result, we want to punish that type of speech in the hopes of deterring it and making people feel safe and protected.
Thank you, Jonathan. I wonder if,
yeah,
go ahead, Carly.
Just because I want to be really clear, as Yael said, that there is a reason for that, for that not being protected, and as she said, tying it to the conduct. And again, I think that it's really important that we acknowledge that we understand that, because there's a lot of confusion about that, and there's a lot of pushback, even in something that's seemingly as simple as just adopting a consistent definition, right? We all know that of anti-Semitism. I say this a lot. We all know certain words and language, when it's used, we readily identify it as racist or misogynist or whatever it is, but we seem to be having a problem consistently identifying anti-Semitism. And so my point, though, is that we've gotten pushback. Those of us who are supporting this definition have gotten pushback that this definition somehow violates free speech rights. When in fact there is no enforcement mechanism in that definition, and the only time that this becomes an issue and becomes actionable is if there is conduct that underlying that, and it's attached to that hateful message. And so again, I just don't want there to be any confusion that we are in any way advocating or condoning the criminalizing of speech without more.
That's exactly right. And also in the same vein, I think that one thing that we're dealing with as a society right now, people who are interested in this topic, is, well, when is it anti-Semitic speech and when is it political speech? And that's something we can get into more in the Q&A, but as in the example I mentioned, F Israel, that would at this point be considered incredibly hateful, but political and protected speech. And sometimes anti-Israel speech crosses the line and becomes anti-Semitic speech, and we can talk more about that later. But it is also important to recognize that not all anti-Israel speech is anti-Semitic.
And also one last thing, and also to recognize, that it can be both. It can be anti-Semitic and political at the same time. And just because it's political and protected doesn't mean that we shouldn't likewise be calling it out, even if we're not trying to silence it or punish it, that we still need to be calling it out as anti-Semitic.
This is why we need a legal department. So important. Jonathan, I wonder if you can give us some examples from your perspective as well.
Sure, and I just also want to add here that the key, and Carly and Yael just basically emphasized everything that I was planning on saying here for this question, is be aware of the problem. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Any lawyer is going to pretty much tell you to gather the evidence wherever possible. And this includes screenshots, videos, pictures. It's possible that something can be done about the matter from a legal angle. And as Yael and Carly both just mentioned, it's very possible that whatever the act is constitutionally protected activity. But that being said, collectively, Yael, Carly, myself, we're well versed in analyzing whether or not something can be done about this legally. So it's always best to for you to gather the evidence and let us take a look at the situation, and we can make a recommendation back based on the facts from there. So what am I seeing now in my area, San Diego? There's a playground about 5-10 minutes from my home where somebody moved the pieces in one of those rolling boards to form the shape of a swastika. A community member who I know passed by, took a picture, posted it on Facebook. I saw it. I then brought it to the attention of our local department. And now, is this protected hate speech? Yes. This is very likely the exact example that Yael was talking about, the campus with the F Israel in the snow. However, the perpetrator also entered a taped off area, since all playgrounds here are closed for the pandemic. So there actually may be some legal issues involved. There was the national issue. I think it's made international news, actually. This was in a nearby town where somebody used a KKK style hood as facial covering. Several people took pictures. Ultimately, this was at a grocery store. Ultimately, a manager asked the man to remove his hood. Likely free speech, but this is a private store. The store can ask the person to leave. The incident was being investigated also. And I should also mention that as anti-Semitism is on the rise, events like this could very easily be seen as inciting imminent violence, which may actually lessen one's free speech claim. But even if it's protected conduct, we're always going to act if we can. Take the playground example. We still reported it. This puts the local authorities on notice of local anti-Semitism. Maybe there are video cameras so we can possibly find out who entered the restricted areas. So it's always good to be proactive and act wherever possible.
And I also wanted to thank all of our audience, all of the listeners who are from around the world. As you probably noticed, this is a very US law-based discussion. We are all US-based lawyers. But if anti-Semitism arises where you are, we do have a pro bono network of attorneys around the world. We have partner organizations that we work with all the time, and we are here to provide legal resources wherever you are. We will do our best to help you.
And it's worth emphasizing also that Stand With Us is working on 5 continents around the world. So we certainly can be there to help and support. And we have resources, educational resources and legal resources on our website. I have here this Know Your Rights booklet that you guys know very well. You put it together, that helps students understand their rights before they step onto campus. And we have different versions of this available for people in the US, in the UK, and I'm sure we can support other people in other places. I wonder whether you've seen an uptick in your work in general during this pandemic, because campuses have shut down. So have things slowed down? What have you been doing during this time? Jonathan, perhaps you can start us off.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a noticeable uptick in our work since the beginning of 2020 alone. And this highlights not only the importance of our work in general, but the knowledge of our department, thanks to our incredible team of community directors, campus coordinators, high school coordinators, who not only bring matters directly to us, but also educate students and community members about our existence and how we respond to anti-Israel or anti-Semitic activity. Now, our work breakdown, Yael mentioned it's the 60% campus, 30% community. It shifted a little bit with the pandemic, which is likely as a result of the pandemic. It's been a little more, not 50-50, but equal community campus. But we've also had a little bit more internal work as we've shifted online, and just to make sure that everything is within proper protocol, which one incidental benefit here, and Yael just mentioned our incredible pro bono attorney network, is it's actually allowed us to engage members of our pro bono network even more regularly. Yael mentioned these, but I think it's worth repeating just because of how important it is. Since our founding less than 6 years ago, we've already had over 1,100 requests for legal help. And in 2020, we've already had 200, and we're not even halfway through the year. So yes, we're absolutely seeing regular work at that.
Terrific. And Carly, I know you've started a new system whereby people can report anti-Semitic acts. Can you tell us more about that?
So, there are other organizations that obviously have reporting tools, and they use those largely for stats, for numbers, that kind of thing. The purpose of our online tool, which you can get to through the Stand With Us website, there's I think a red box, in the top right. It should be very visible. Largely the purpose of that is so that we can respond to these incidents. And one of the unique things about our tool in particular is when we created the button that allows you to report online anti-Semitic activity on social media, instead of just leaving it there or even just asking, which platform did this occur on, you can actually click there and you can give us the information about the incident, and obviously we'll engage with you and see, what we can do, what resources we can bring to bear. But there's also a link that allows the individual reporting to click on there and go directly to that platform's website to report it directly to that platform. And we know that there's strength in numbers. And so one of the things that we're doing with that information is making sure that as those things get reported to us, we're able to share that so that a larger number, we have volume, and we've got a number of people issuing complaints to the social media platform and requests either to remove accounts or to remove posts that violate their policies. And so that's been an important tool for us during this time, again, as I said earlier, because so much of what we're seeing has moved online. And so it's really important that we still have the ability to report that and to make sure that it gets exposed. I'll mention real quickly one of the other things that, as we're seeing, Yael brought this up, that we're seeing some of the anti-Semitic rhetoric and speech translate now into vandalism of synagogues. And thankfully, we haven't seen nearly as much in the way of physical attacks as we were seeing in certain cities before the pandemic. But even just with regard to the vandalism, we are partnering with the Mizell Family Foundation to offer rewards, monetary rewards, for individuals who come forward with information that leads to the arrest and conviction of a hate crime against Jews or against their property. And so as we're seeing this unfortunate increase in physical attacks against the property of Jewish organizations, we at least are happy to be able to participate with law enforcement and with those congregations to be able to hopefully incentivize and encourage people to come forward to make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable. So that's another important initiative that we've been working on during this time, and obviously want everyone to know that that is available. And again, it's just one of those things where we rely on working together with our partners in the community, and are happy to be able to do that.
We have a lot of questions coming in from people around the world. I want to get to them. Just prior to that, Yael, what's number one on your agenda when the pandemic crisis is over? Let's hope it's soon.
It's soon. I think as a legal department, I would say that our priority is probably first and foremost to students, providing students with the resources they need to be able to fight back and stand strong on campus. And in the same vein, to any educators, professors, and community activists, anyone who needs help in fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity, we are here to help day and night, free legal resources, anyone who needs it.
And if people want to get in touch, it's legal@standwithus.com.
That's right.
Okay, let's go. Or yes.
Or our website, the legal
Or
on our website,
which is standwithus.com/legal. Okay, I want to go to some of our questions from people who are watching. Ronnie is watching from New York. He says, how can someone who is not Jewish play a role in the fight against anti-Semitism? Carly?
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that someone who is not Jewish can be the director of the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. I'm not Jewish, but I certainly believe that this is the right thing for all people of conscience and of goodwill to be involved in the fight. So I would say that whatever it is you are involved in, whatever your sphere of influence is, I think the biggest thing that I would encourage people to do is to educate others about anti-Semitism. As Michael mentioned, we have vast resources available on the Stand With Us website that address all manner of topics, including issues about Israel and how to support Israel, but also how to combat anti-Semitism. And so I think that education is key. I think that it's crucial that we as non-Jews develop relationships with the Jewish members of our community. And so, if you can find a way to do that, whether it's through Jewish community organizations or through a synagogue, I think that those are crucial ways to make sure that we as non-Jews are understanding the issues that our Jewish brothers and sisters are facing. So I think those are some of the key things. But again, I just go back to educating yourself first, so that you can then educate others, and making it clear. I think it's important, not as a tokenizing thing, but just to make it clear, if you're not Jewish, but this is an issue that is important to you, I think it's important to make that very clear, that this I'm not doing this because I'm Jewish or because I have necessarily a personal stake in this, but I understand that this is a societal disease, and I understand that it doesn't just affect Jewish people. It infects. I said infects. I meant affects, but it infects the entire culture. So again, I think that also encouraging others. I'll end with this: encouraging others who are within your community, your non-Jewish community, to take up the fight and to stand alongside the Jewish people, I think is crucial.
Okay, Legal Minds. David would like to know, he has something to tell us. When he was a grad student in the University of Arizona English department, another grad student singled him out and screamed at him randomly in a restaurant saying, "I hate Jews and I hate you. He went on to blame Jews for the Shoah, for the Holocaust. He says, when I reported it to the graduate director, she made an excuse for him. Another professor just laughed at me. Is this a hate crime? What's the statute of limitations in the United States for hate crimes? Who would like to take that?
I can go, or Jonathan, or.
Go ahead, Yael.
All right, I'll start off, and whoever.
I'll chime in.
So that's a great question. It is a question that we get a lot, so you're in good company, David. First of all, statute of limitations would be state specific, so we'd have to feel free to contact us at legal@standwithus.com, and we are happy to look into the specifics for you, when this occurred, what the laws are in that state. That said, it sounds like it probably was not a crime, but very hateful. It could have been a crime if you felt threatened, if you thought the person was about to attack you. There's definitely ways that we can look into this. So what I would suggest is, since most of these things are incredibly case specific, please be in touch with us, and we will see if there is something that can be done.
And I'll just add, David, I'm so sorry that this happened in general. Bringing it to the school's administration is absolutely what we recommend doing. Even if it is protected conduct, you're still putting them on notice that this type of activity is not acceptable, and it affects you as a student. It happened outside at a restaurant. It doesn't sound like it actually happened on campus. Doesn't matter, as Yael said, they're all fact specific, but we're happy to take a look and see if there's anything we can do.
Javier from Miami is asking us, how do you approach a situation when you know that an anti-Semitic speaker is scheduled to speak on campus?
This is a great question. We get this a lot. When there's an anti-Semitic speaker, a person who is known with anti-Israel views, a lot of people say, well, is there anything we can do to prevent this from happening? How would you recommend us go about speaking to the administration to get this speaker off of campus? So first off, we generally don't recommend that you act in a way to get the speaker off campus, because there is this really, really, really wonderful thing called the First Amendment. Carly gave a great overview of the First Amendment and went into the specifics. There's this lovely legal term that I'm sure any attorney on here might be nodding his or her head, called viewpoint neutrality, which means that the university cannot merely get rid of a speaker because they disagree with his or her viewpoint. It's generally more prevalent in public universities. Private universities, there's a little bit more wiggle room because the First Amendment may or may not apply. It also optically may be a bad look. So putting the university on notice that you're not happy with the speaker is a great thing to do. This is going to be a theme that you'll hear all three of us hammer over and over and over. Put the university on notice. The administration can still put out a statement saying, we absolutely do not accept any type of anti-Semitic activity here. We are a diverse campus community. We are a melting pot for all different viewpoints, and we encourage active dialogue. That is one thing you could do. You could ask the administration to distance yourself. What I would not recommend doing is asking them to get rid of the speaker necessarily. But also, when the speaker does come, if the speaker does ultimately end up coming, attend the speaker, attend the speech. Maybe the speaker is using his or her platform to spew anti-Semitic discrimination. Then you've got another issue that you can bring to the university's attention. And the university has that obligation through Title VI, through other outlets to act and to do something, most likely.
I just want to add and echo what Jonathan said about how important it is to put the university on notice, and again, just to make it really clear the reason that is, and the reason that we do it. It's one of the things that we do jointly through the legal department and the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism is when we know that this is going to happen, we will contact the university and make sure that they know that we're aware of it, make sure they are aware of the speaker's record in this regard, because it can play into a potential Title VI action. One of the things that we know from the work of other organizations is that it is more likely after a speaker is brought in, particularly a speaker that's brought in under the authority of and with the approval of an academic department, if an anti-Semitic speaker is brought in that way, it's more likely that on those campuses there's going to be student-to-student anti-Semitism that results after the fact. And so if the university is on notice that that is a potential, then that helps our ability, if in fact that's what happens, and if a pervasively hostile environment is created, then that significantly bolsters our ability to be able to, to operate within the Title VI framework.
And it also, that's absolutely right. It also brings to mind different scenarios that could come up and just to be on the lookout for. So sometimes what will happen on campus is an anti-Israel speaker will be brought in and a teacher will decide that it's mandatory attendance. That could be problematic, and that could be a way that we could fight back from a legal standpoint. And then another, maybe this will come up in another question, but something to think about is the other side of this, which is when a pro-Israel speaker comes to campus, and what if that is about to be disrupted. At Stand With Us, we have a whole strategy on how to prevent disruptions of pro-Israel speakers and what to do if a disruption occurs. And that's something, of course, we can get into later as well.
We have another question here. How much anti-Israel activity is required on a certain campus before Title VI kicks in?
Wow, if we could answer that directly, you know, we'd be in really good shape. Unfortunately, there's not a definitive answer to that. What Title VI says is that a university, in this particular case, it's a recipient of federal funding, and so, you know, we're talking about campus. So the university administration has an obligation to ensure that a pervasively hostile climate is not created on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And as we said earlier, you know, there's been clarification that that does include Jewish students based on shared ancestry. And so what constitutes a pervasively hostile environment or campus climate it's a case-by-case analysis. And you know, I'll just being very literal because I am, and because the question was how much anti-Israel activity, as Yael mentioned earlier, anti-Israel activity is not necessarily anti-Semitic. It may be, and so that, you know, that kind of comes into play as well. The mere fact that there is anti-Israel activity may not contribute at all to a pervasively hostile environment. Generally, and what we find is that it does, because even if the anti-Israel event or speech is focused exclusively on Israel, and, you know, even in the very rare circumstances where it's actual legitimate criticism of a government policy and not anti-Semitism, generally that's going to bleed over, and there's going to be some anti-Semitic rhetoric and activity that accompanies that. But again, I think the only way to answer that really is to say that it has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And it has to be analyzed in the first instance. You know, we're the ones who would be analyzing that alongside the student or professor, whoever brought that, you know, to our attention, and saying, you know, yeah, we think that there's enough here. But then, you know, ultimately the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is who makes that call. And that's done after an extensive investigation with both the complainant and with, you know, with those at the university who, you know, who would be responsible for looking into that.
And I think, Carly, I think that you're absolutely right. And an example would be the work that we did starting last year, which was that it just took the start of one particularly egregious incident at UCLA that helped us to then file with a student at UCLA a Title VI action. And it started with one incident that occurred against a student because of an anti-Israel speaker in her class. It led to a pervasively hostile environment for that student, and as a result, a Title VI action was filed.
And I want to add one other thing here. Carly made this point earlier, and I think it's so important to reiterate this. Merely because there's anti-Semitic or anti-Israel activity, we don't necessarily jump right to Title VI. We get some requests from people, well, this happened, we want to file a Title VI, or, you know, we want to do something if a Title VI is possible. And it's wonderful that you know, collectively at the Stand With Us Side-Off Legal Department and the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, we were able to file this Title VI case last year. But just as important as it is for us to have been involved in that matter, it's important for us to educate people that Title VI is a tool, and a very important tool in our toolbox, but it cannot be seen as the default every single time something happens. You know, to Yael's point just now, what happened at UCLA last May may very well have been enough, that one incident in and of itself. We also had incidents going back several years. If you read that complaint, just a litany of incidents that we probably could have gone back many, many more if we really wanted to continuously prove our point for a pervasive and hostile campus environment.
And you may have already answered this, but Aaron is saying, is there any scenario that a public social media containing anti-Semitic language and imagery, a post by a student organization, could be bound by Title VI protections?
Uh, Again, I'll just reiterate what I said. There would have to be some evidence that it somehow created a hostile campus climate, that it somehow interfered with the ability of Jewish students to fully and meaningfully participate, in the programs of the university. So I think the easy answer, the simple answer is yes, it's certainly possible. But again, it's very evidence and fact based, and so it just really depends on the situation. Mere feelings of, I'm concerned or that upset me is obviously not going to be enough. But depending upon, it's not so much what is said. I mean, what is said could be part of the equation, but it's more the effect that it has that's going to determine whether or not Title VI would come into play.
But we have lots of other resources, as Jonathan said, tools in our tool belt, besides Title VI. So if a student group posts something on social media that is anti-Semitic, there are lots of other resources that we can use to call them out on this activity. And those include codes of conduct on campus. Those include the rules governing student groups. There's lots of other resources we can turn to. Title VI is just one tool that we have as a community to fight back.
Dorothy from Austin, Texas is asking us about campus bylaws and policies. Are student senates still up and running even if campuses are shut down? If schools remain virtual for some time, what role do we see that student senates will play in the next few months? And do you foresee a decrease in BDS resolutions?
I'm not necessarily so sure I see a decrease in BDS resolutions. If anything, I see an increase, or at least the status quo, which is unfortunate because it's out there. It's an excellent question. Yes, student senates and student governments are absolutely still running, even though campuses are shut down. Campus elections just took place. Maybe there wasn't so much of the in-person hostility that we've seen because it was all virtual, but this, I think, is going to be, and I mentioned this earlier, going to be coming back. But as Yael just mentioned, the codes of conduct and the bylaws are so important because these are rules. These are not mere suggestions. And oftentimes anti-Israel activists have tried to circumvent these rules, these policies that are put in place for a reason in order to further their potential BDS agenda. So it's important to be aware of potential BDS activity, especially by the student government leaders, and make sure you bring it to our attention if you see it. So great point, great question. And if there are students out there watching, please know that we're here to help at any time.
I could talk to you and listen to you all day, but unfortunately we will run out of time at some point. So let me give it over to you for the final word, perhaps just your final thought or something you want to make sure that it gets said in the context of our broadcast today. Carly, let me go over to you first.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest takeaways, I hope, are one, just the importance of remaining vigilant, being the eyes and ears when you see anti-Semitic activity or something that you think is anti-Semitic, that you report it. I mean, that we're here for that. And like I said, there may be a legal angle, and even if there isn't, as I said earlier, the two kind of wings of the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism are education and action. And that doesn't necessarily just include legal action. There are other things that can be done. I mentioned reporting the attacks against Jews and against their property. Those are things that need to be reported, that need to be exposed. So I think those are kind of the biggest takeaways, is to make sure that as you're going through this time, that you're remaining vigilant, and that when you see something, we hear this in the subways all the time, see something, say something.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carly. Jonathan, over to you.
I think I could just piggyback on that. I mean, Carly got the evidence part and also the notice part. I mean, evidence, record, and notice. Put your schools, or put your school administrations, or put your community law enforcement officials on notice if this activity is taking place.
And Yael?
I would just say, be empowered. We are here to help you. When I was an undergrad, I had definitely anti-Israel professors who made me feel very intimidated, but Stand With Us didn't exist then. It does exist now. We are here to help you. We have your back, and we will do everything we can to make you feel empowered and fight back.
Yael, thank you so much for being with us. Jonathan, kudos to you for all the legal support you're giving to college students. Carly, Thank you for everything that the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism is doing. We are thrilled and very honored to have you with us. I want to remind everybody watching that our next show is coming up on Thursday. It's titled Israel, Zionism, and the Path for Peace. Former member of Knesset and author of the new book, The War of Return, Einat Wilf will be joining us, and she'll be live in conversation with Roz Rothstein. If you enjoyed today's webinar, the Stand With Us Sale of Legal Department proudly offers continuing legal education on various matters intersecting Israel, Judaism, and the law. Please visit standwithus.com/legal to start earning your credits today, and you can register and view the full program of everything that's going on all of our shows at standwithusconnect.com. Once again, our thanks to our legal experts for all the work that they're doing, supporting students and community members in the fight against anti-Semitism, to Carly Gamble, to Yael Lemon, and to Jonathan Bell. Thank you for being with us. If you at home love Stand With Us and you want to support what we do, you can donate at standwithus.com/donate. And by the way, you can also get a private Stand With Us Connect show, webinar, lecture by one of our amazing experts, including, by the way, our legal team. I'll volunteer them, why not? You need to write to us at connect@standwithus.com, and we'll arrange it for any group that you have, youth group, university campus group, church group, synagogue group, whatever it may be. We'll be happy to address you. It was a pleasure to connect with you all tonight. I'm Michael Dix from Israel for Stand With Us Connect. Shalom, and I'll see you next time.